In this video, we shall be taking a look at minor piece ending, that is knight versus bishop endings. And generally, this type of bishop ending, especially with pawns on both sides of the board, are much better for the side with the bishop, right? But in this case, there are some exceptions, like this problem solves. So it was a white to play and win the game. So it's an excellent chess problem by Richard Reti. So give yourself a few minutes and try to find the solution. Try to see if you can win this game. Alright, the first move that white has to play is knight to d4, and this does a few things. First of all, it creates a barrier around the pawn so the king cannot really get to the pawn so easily. That's the first thing it does. Another thing, after king to c5, now here comes the point. White has to play king to h1, and this is the only winning move in the position. So after this move, after king to h1, white is absolutely winning. So let's see what happens if again there is a barrier over here. You can see the king can't approach the white pawn, so the white pawn is safe. What happens if the king takes? This time we just push forward, and that will be an easy queen. Nobody can stop it. The bishop is really misplaced and it cannot really stop the pawn. So going back, what happens if he moves his bishop? For example, bishop f8. Here we have knight e6. That's a fork. Alright, doesn't work. Bishop g7. Here we have knight e6 again, forking the king and bishop. What about bishop g5? Yes, knight e6 again. So it cannot go on f8, g7 or g5. What about f4? Yes, it's the fork again. The bishop is absolutely dominated. It cannot even enter on e3 because the pawn takes. So there are only two squares remaining. Bishop to d2. This time we have knight to b3. Yes, the destruction comes from another side. And for example, a continuation can go like this. Here, yes, he captures our pawn, but we have got another pawn. I mean, we have got a passed f pawn, a king, and a knight, and this is absolutely winning. So, yeah, this is completely winning. What happens if he finally goes on c1? Even here, the bishop is not safe, and we have knight to b3, and that's a fork. Again, winning very simply. So, what an excellent chess problem by Richard Reti. Let's take another example of this theme and see if you can try to solve it. So this one is basically my favorite one. It's by Troitsky, Alexei Troitsky, and it's a wonderful problem. Again, it's a clash between two minor pieces. This is knight versus the bishop. The bishop will soon open up, as you can see, and the bishop will have the full diagonal, but it will still be dominated. So first move, white plays a5. The pawn is running down the board. It has to be stopped. Only with two is stopping with the king. So a6, king to c6, and here comes the point. White to play. White plays. You can pause the video if you want. The move is knight to d5. This again creates a barrier. So there is an invisible barrier. The king cannot really get closer to the pawn. And that's the reason the knight basically saves the pawn. So now let's see what happens. Okay, if he takes, then there is a simple a7 and we will queen. It will be a girl. What about other moves? Bishop g8 not working because of knight e7. That's a fork. So the only logical move that he can play is pushing forward with f4. We'll take it. Now he has freed up his bishop, but that's in vain because there are absolutely no squares that he can go to. So again, going here is not working because of knight e7. So let's go back. Bishop g6. What happens if bishop g6? Now we have knight e7 again. That's a fork. So we can run out this square and this square. What happens to it cannot come over here. It cannot come over here. So there are only three squares remaining. Let's go to d3. Let's go bishop d3. This time we have knight b4. That's an easy fork. Let's go to c2. Knight b4 again, folks. And that's the reason black's only logical move, as it cannot go over here and here, is basically to put the bishop back on b1, all the way on b1. Now, this is where white plays king to e5, just waiting for black to move. Black does not have any good moves. He just plays the bishop at side. So there are only two squares for the bishop. Now, how do we play this one? How do we win this one? Here comes the point. We play f4, bishop e1, f5, blocking the bishop's path. So the bishop can no longer go to h7 square, and it has basically only one move, that is to take the pawn. And you might, at first sight, it looks crazy because After takes, you might think, okay, the knight is hanging, but it isn't, because you can't really capture it, as there is a7 and the pawn will queen. What else can he do? Something like g5? Well, I'll take it, and that's an absolutely zugzwang position. I mean, what can you do? You can't really go closer to the pawn because of the barrier that the knight and pawn is created. And if you try to go it, like from here, it's too late, because I'll just go a7 and next move I'm queening. That's not working. Here again, I'll just a7 works, and capturing the knight, not gonna work because of a7. I'm just going to queen next move, and this is easily winning. So basically, this is a zugzwang position, and black to play completely loses. So this was one of my favorite position by Troitsky. I mean, a really, really nice one. Now let's take a look at our third example, third and last example. All right, so here's the last example. It's in the knight versus bishop domination. Knight again will dominate this time. So it's white to play and win. This one is by Sneft. It was composed in 1948. So an excellent chess problem. Again, just give yourself a few minutes and think. The thing I like about this problem is the bishop is on the longest diagonal on the board, and yet it will still be dominated by the knight. So let's see what happens. We start with, okay, give yourself a few minutes and try to find the solution. If you have if you want, you can pause the video and see if you can come up with a solution this time, as you already know the pattern. So c7, the pawn is running towards the queening square, that is on c8. It has to be stopped by the king and king b7. So we reach here, and this is where we play knight to f7. And it turns out that black has only one move here, and he has to play bishop to a1. So why bishop a1? Why not other squares? All the other squares are poisoned. So for example, bishop g7 turns out into a horrible mistake. We have knight d6 check. You can see the idea is simply to push forward and promote the pawn, as the knight is supporting the c8 square. So the pawn has to be taken, and now we have knight fork. So g7 is not the square for the bishop. Let's go back. What about bishop to f6? This time we again have the same idea, 96, 98, forking it, not working. It can't really land on e5 because of the pawn or the knight. What about bishop to d4? Here we have knight d6 followed by knight b5, again winning it. And the same goes for something like bishop c3. We have again knight d6, threatening to promote the pawn with c8, and that has to be captured, and after that we have knight to b5. So basically it turns out that the only correct move here for black is to put the bishop all the way on a1. That's the power of the knight and the pawn. You can see it's a beautiful combination. It's simply a beautiful combination. They're just too powerful. But this is where our king comes into action. All we have to do is just ask the bishop, what are you going to do? Because all of these squares, as we have already seen, are poisoned, and the bishop cannot really use it. So g7, there is just knight d6, knight d8, f6, knight d6, knight d8. All of these are four king squares. Bishop tries to go on c3, but again we just go knight to d6, threatening to push forward and promote, and he has to basically capture it. And after that we have knight to b5, check, picking up the bishop and basically winning the game. So hope you've enjoyed this coverage of minor piece endings, knight versus bishop. I'll also be covering the part 2 of this, which will include bishop versus knight, where the bishop will be the one who is dominating the knight, and we'll basically capture the knight. This kind of endgames are common. I mean, the bishop dominating ones are more common, but we'll still see some best examples of that. So thank you for watching, and do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Bye.